Hi, this is Drake Barakis, Chair of the National Clinic Society, and hosting today's version of NHS Talks. As you know, we've been celebrating the 200th anniversary of Greek independence, and we've spent a lot of time focusing on the many benefits of and the history of the Philhellenes, both before, during, and after the War of Independence, and the continued support, as well as the growth and expansion of thoughts and ideals that the Philhellenes, especially those that were actually in Greece fighting, brought back here in the United States, and how it's shaped our nation over time. And certainly we have different categories, I guess you'd say, or different levels of how you classify Philhellenes and into the modern day. You see, many academics, many folks in architecture and archaeology and science that are continuing doing great work, passing on their knowledge to the generations that have come into their experiences and their educational into their classrooms and so forth. But there's also been a great story to tell in terms of with Greece being through a very difficult economic crisis, and then subsequent to that, obviously the whole world's experiencing the pandemic. It's great to see Philhellene interested in hearing her story and meeting what she has to say and what she's done, and what I guess sparked her interest in Greece is Lucy Sue. So Lucy, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Before we get into the question you're probably always asked, and we'll try to figure that one out in a second about what made you decide to go to Greece, invest in Greece, be a part of the Greek ecosystem, and why you feel it's important. Let's start off with just a little bit of a background info for our viewers. Let us know, obviously before you came over to Greece, what were you doing? Your studies, where you're from. Tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to Drake and the NHS team and community for having me here. Truly such an honor to be considered a Philhellene and to be here with you today. So to dive a little bit into my origins, I suppose, I'm clearly not Greek, but a big fan of the Greek culture. I am Chinese American. I'm first generation Chinese American. My parents immigrated to the Midwest, Detroit, from Northeast China, and that's where I grew up. After which I went to Philadelphia to attend the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, studying business, concentrations in marketing and management. And after university, I went to New York City, where I worked at IBM briefly in their global business services consulting division, and then went and transitioned into the startup world when I was in New York City. So working at a scale up that recently got acquired called Curelate. And that kind of takes us to the juncture at which I was itching for my next adventure following a few years in New York City, and leading me to, I'm sure we'll get into this later, but finding my way to Greece in 2016.
And you've been there ever since.
And I've been here ever since, yeah. So
you've really fully immersed yourself. This isn't just someone that's interested in Greece from afar and is doing investments, let's say from abroad. You actually physically set up shop, moved, and you've been there for obviously the tail end of the economic crisis, at least on paper, change in government, and obviously now experiencing the pandemic, but also being a major part of the startup ecosystem we all have been reading about and hearing about and seeing firsthand for those of us that have been to Greece in the last few years. So let's begin with let's kind of see how we can frame it of what got you to Greece. So let me ask you first: did you have, as you were thinking about that kind of next step or next adventure in your life or next experience? Was Greece even on the radar? Meaning that, did you have any either friends or peers that kind of talked to you about a little bit about Greece? Was there anyone specifically you met or heard about while you were either at Penn or IBM or anywhere in New York? Did you travel to Greece first, and that's when it kind of hit you? So tell us a little bit about what got you interested in Greece first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely. First and foremost, honestly, the travel and tourism. It was a trip. It was my first trip to Greece. I was here on holiday in 2016, and truthfully, came just more of like an eat, pray, love style solo trip for a week and a half. Came to Athens, did the Acropolis, went to Santorini, and of course, Greek summer just draws you in, especially if you're a first timer, in a way that is inexplicable. And I think I joke that, and my friends joke that I might have been Greek in a past life, but there was just a really deep connection that I kind of, it's hard to put into words, but really kept me thinking about Greece after I returned to New York. And part of the goal of the solo trip and the intention was also to kind of clear my head a little bit and figure out what I wanted to do in terms of next steps, because the company had grown from seed to Series B. My role had changed a lot, and I was itching to get to a more early stage venture, which at that point, honestly, I thought would still be in New York City. But with Greece still on my mind, I was kind of taking final round interviews in New York. I was still submitting resumes, and I was sitting in a coffee shop one weekend, and I Googled, a thought popped into my mind, and I Googled top startups in Athens, and that's how the journey unfolded. It was September of 2016, after I'd come back, still tan, kind of from the Greek sun, and with my eye on the next adventure. And the article that I'd found from that search was from 2012 at that time, but there were some pretty OGs, original gangsters in the ecosystem on that list. Forky, Nanuka, a handful of others that I reached out to, just cold outreach. And with the expectation that either some of them might have shut down shop, or they're not looking for a native speaking marketer, or they're on to their next venture. So half of them got back to me, said we really appreciate your enthusiasm, but you're right, we're looking for a native Greek speaking marketer. That being said, if you're serious about moving to Greece, we have people that we could introduce you to. And so that's kind of how the ripple effect of virtually networking my way into the ecosystem began.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so what kind of, as you approach the date of actually physically moving, what kind of preparation and planning? Obviously, you were starting off your networking, but any specifically, other than the companies you reached out to, did you pretty much go on your own, or did you, was anybody instrumental in helping you make that transition from the States to Greece, that's, moving, which is, it's hard enough as, let's say, myself as a Greek American of the diaspora, even though I know the language fairly well, and I have family and friends there. It's still, anyway you look at it, it's moving from one country to another is a major transition. So regardless of language, and so how was that process? Were there certain people either before or during or after that were very helpful, influential?
Yeah, I would say it's not specifically, it was definitely, there were people, and the people came from a network. So I would say it was specifically, there were networks that were really influential. One was a Facebook group, and it's how I found the opportunities that I'd received offers from before I moved to Greece, called Open Coffee Greece. There's also like a lot of other startuper groups. The tech community in Greece is very, very active in Facebook in a way that I wasn't used to coming from. We use Facebook a little bit differently in the States, but that was really instrumental. Also, I think the leveraging my personal network, I remember I reached out to a couple of professors I'd had from Wharton and asked them, if by any chance, like when I was going through the negotiation process, when I was figuring out where to live, et cetera, they had any experience in either helping me navigate, the negotiation internationally or what have you. And they'd mentioned, actually, they passed along a couple of names of like research assistants and PhD students that had Greek ties that I got in touch with. And so it really was the power of the network, and then finding people within that to kind of share the tips and the knowledge that they were able to from their whatever expertise and background they had.
So you make your way over to Greece, you've done your research and planning, you've got your network in place, but until you physically live there and see things and live it yourself, because you were there as a tourist, And obviously, it's a much different experience once you're on the ground and you start actually going to open coffee and meeting people and meeting startups. What was the kind of the first and you obviously, through technology and communications and media, you had a good sense of where things were at that point in time. But what was some of the things that were kind of eye-opening to you? Let's talk about the ecosystem first. We'll talk about Greece in general in a second. But what were some of the things that from your perspective, of all the things you had read or heard or were told about, once you were on the ground and started to see things firsthand, what stuck out?
Truthfully, one of the areas that stuck out about just the reality of the crisis was capital controls. I think it was something that was just very tangible and very quote unquote limiting in a way that I wasn't used to, coming from like a lush, abundant, resource-filled place like New York City, the States. And I wouldn't even, at that point, I didn't even recognize how many resources I had had at my disposal in the States until I kind of faced that first, just that first reality, which is essentially, for those who weren't familiar with it, you could only withdraw up to, I think, 200 euros of cash from the bank, regardless of whether it was a local account or like an abroad account. And I think that was the first kind of test, I guess, in the hero's journey of like, this is a reality. Like you chose to come at the tail end of a crisis and kind of see what opportunities there were. And this is just par for the course. Obviously things have since, progressed and that has been lifted. I would say was one of the first tangible reality checks that I had. And then in terms of I guess the business culture, I think is kind of like, was a little bit of a double-edged sword in that it moved at a more kind of Mediterranean pace. It moved at a pace that, I mean, relative to New York City, a lot of places just don't seem as like hustle and bustle. And I think especially moving to Greece, that was something that I had to adjust and I had to like really recognize and also check myself in recognizing what was very American, what was what was going to be framed in, what could be framed in a more global way in meetings, in conversations, so that it's actually understood and not, kind of globalizing your English, making sure that, slowing down when you're speaking, or kind of all of the nitty gritty of just adapting to a new business culture, which I would say, like you had mentioned, Drake, it's the same anywhere. If I chose to move to France or Germany or back to China, like it would be the same kind of adjustment period. That being said, on the other end of things, what I really do like, and I still try to learn and kind of absorb as much as I can from the Greek culture, is just how human things are. I think a lot of the pace that I'd mentioned before comes from that. It's like they really value face-to-face interaction. They don't mind pushing like the next meeting to have an extended coffee chat because the human interaction is so valuable in terms of just building connection and building future collaborations. So I think I strayed a little bit from the original question, but those are the two kind of main points of adjusting and seeing the Greek culture.
Yeah, one of the things I've read as I followed it closely is that the economic crisis, with the creation of kind of the entrepreneurial spirit and the startup environment in Greece. One of the major factors, and I'm curious if you mentioned the capital controls, because of things like capital controls and limited resources, that just by design, unlike, like you said, entrepreneurs in this country, let's say, as much as they are trying to be cost conscious and being very, focused on money and spending it the right way, and of course, the big buzzword is the burn rate here in this country. It seemed like the crisis actually created somewhat of a positive in that Greek startups knew, with capital controls as well as limited resources, that they were in a shoestring budget. So anything they had to do was very, to somewhat controlling, but at the same time, they knew that every euro counted. So did you get a sense of that as you met a number of entrepreneurs and startups, that they kind of had that discipline forced upon them, but it's actually a positive discipline, that they were, they didn't have, thousands and thousands of euros or hundreds of thousands of euros just to randomly spend to see if things happen. They really had to, cross their T's and dot their I's.
Yeah, definitely. I would say it's very cash savvy here because of the climate, and it's the results I've seen both in that for the first couple of years, and also our work with very early stage startups now, is they build for longevity in a way that in a more sustainable pace, because they are very cash savvy. I think in this, like you'd mentioned, burn rate is associated with, we create a seed deck now on this call, and then we get, a couple of million in seed funding, easy, no stress, from some Silicon Valley investors through our network. And then immediately it's you rise fast, but that also leads to failing fast, and also just crashing in a way that I think is it's just more, it's a steadier, more realistic, more cash savvy approach that you're seeing startups here. They're very conscious of hiring. They're not hiring a million heads at once they get that initial seed funding. They're very conscious of revenue generation. A lot of the early stage startups are actually already generating revenue in a way that in the States you're not. You're kind of burning through cash with that first seed round, or that first fundraise, and you don't really have much to show for it except maybe a cool product. Whereas here, you need customers to survive. You need to get money in the pockets in order to hire more heads and kind of see your business grow. Yeah,
one of the other, and I'm going to get obviously specifically into what you're actually doing over there, your work, the launch of your first fund, and all that stuff in a second. But one of the things that we experience here in the States, and we hear a lot about Greece and the young professionals in Greece, is that first and foremost, their English is impeccable for the most part, and while the business culture may be different, it's much easier than it was years ago. They're taught English to some extent. Probably, I think most. I hate to say it, most countries that probably teach English probably teach it better than we do here in the States. But that's a whole other issue. But one of the things is that they've had to learn that because Greece is such a small market, and globally, and that usually, if you're a startup or have that mentality of a startup, there's going to be very few options if you have something, whether it's a product or a service idea that can resonate. That it really has to be focused, beyond Greece, Europe, Far East, United States. Ultimately, if it's something significant. So, when you first got there, did you get a sense that they were already kind of thinking, or was it still kind of a transition that there were still folks that still had that kind of provincial inward thinking model sort of in their heads, or certainly a lot of the successful companies like Blue Ground and Workable that have made it over here to the States. One of their factors, obviously, other than having great teams and great ideas and launching what they did, was they also were thinking big, thinking large, thinking that this isn't a Greek-centric product. This is something that's going to benefit the rest of the world. So, do you get a sense as you talk with startups and entrepreneurs when you first got there versus today that there's a focus on global expansion and really the global marketplace?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I think the long answer is actually, I would say it's two-pronged, because I think there's a lot of technical innovation. There's a lot of digitization that was just driven by need locally. Things like the first marketplaces, like eFood, TaxiBee being the first, the online food delivery app, and the taxi hailing app that were the first exits many years back. That I think just drives a very local need. So you do see a lot of founders seeing what areas are pretty low hanging fruit for disruption in that sense. And then the other half, you do see people, I would say you actually kind of see founders. We're seeing this trend shift now, but I would say you see Greek founders kind of go to other markets, start there, and then see make their way back to the Greece. So Instacart, for example, in Dubai. I'd also in my first year worked with Blendo. They recently got acquired last year. But around 2017, they had, I think, just graduated from a Tel Aviv incubator, and they had set up shop in Greece with ties to Israeli ecosystem. So you kind of see both sides. You see both local disruption as well as Greeks realizing that there's a bigger marketplace, and especially in the case of B2B SaaS companies, seeing that there's a bigger market share, that it's pretty easy with kind of the really high-end PhD, top talent, uneducated pool, highly educated but unemployed pool that is here kind of putting their engineering brains together and building something that could reach a B2B SaaS market globally, et cetera. So yeah, I'd say you see both. And another example that really stands out is when I was apartment hunting, I think my first year here, there were just a couple of local options, and they were all not really local. They weren't translated, so they were all in Greek. And now you see more and more options like Prosperity, Blue Ground. Blue Ground was around then, but now Blue Ground is even more robust. So that's awesome to see in terms of founders recognizing that there is global interest also coming into Greece, and how do you localize and address that market share.
Right. So let's talk about your business. Launching your business in Greece and what that entails, and tell us a little bit about what obviously you've touched upon a lot of things, but tell us specifically about what your business model was coming into Greece, what your goals and expectations were, and how that potentially has shifted since you first moved there.
Yeah, definitely. So when I first came to Greece, I actually spent a year on the ground working on the inside of an early stage ed tech startup to kind of learn the inner workings of what an early stage startup looked like here, continue networking and kind of building community. And then after 1 year on the ground, built what I am now building called The Port, which is an international marketing and business consultancy that is supporting startups in Greece and other emerging tech markets. And it was born out of the mission of basically doing what I was doing at that first startup, which is leading digital marketing efforts, and now doing it at scale to support not only one vertical, but a lot of verticals, all of the main verticals that are in Greece, as well as all of the just the plethora and growing number of early stage Greek startups that we're seeing come out of this ecosystem. And the next leg of the climb, now we've been building the port for about 3 years now, and we've seen a lot of really interesting ideas, both by way of our client work as well as workshops that we're hosting with local organizations. And we are raising our first fund in order to support these startups, not only with the resources such as international marketing and business services, but also giving them resources, ideally with some international capital. So that is our next leg of the climb.
Wonderful. And again, we've seen from here in the States, certainly the growing interest, not only of homegrown European venture firms, but also U.S. firms as well. Let me just throw it out there. I mean, in terms of your fund, what for folks that kind of know the marathons and some of the venture friends and some of the ones more familiar names that are out there. I know there's others. What's here's your pitch. What's your differentiating factor as well? I know it's your first fund, so obviously that's in and of itself a great accomplishment. But where do you see the opportunity that maybe some of the other funds haven't? As this ecosystem evolves, where's your niche and where's the opportunities that you see?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say it is an extension of the niche that we carved out for ourselves as the consultancy, which is the first global consultancy that is offering and bridging true global best practices from at this point, the marketing and business sectors. And we are going to translate that also into the fund. So it is going to be an international team led by myself, and we are trying to bring this international standard of expertise to early stage, so pre-seed and seed stage startups, to help them grow and also connect them to the markets that we are connected with, which is both the East and the West. So tapping into both my Chinese and my American roots, as well as our network that really spans across the hemispheres.
Yeah, and I want to touch upon that. I mean, one of the things, it's somewhat generational. I know we can get into a lot of discussions, but one of the things, I'd love to hear your perspective. One of the things that I've experienced, I'm second generation Greek American. All my grandparents came from Greece. Is obviously the amount of pride that we have in our culture and our heritage, and we have a rich history as well. But one of the things that I think it's, I wouldn't say it's unique, but I think unfortunately in the world we live in, I'm fortunate enough to have grown up in a very multicultural city, multi-diverse city. So I've had experiences at a much earlier age than maybe, some students that are growing in suburbs or certain areas of this country in the United States have. And of course, we have all these, issues that we're dealing with, not only here in the States, but worldwide. But one of the things I've always been, and maybe it's just me, but I think there's more of us, a lot of us out there that really take pride in exploring different cultures, and religions too, but really different, what makes people different. And I always say, and I believe it too, is, and I have friends that are all different types. And I try to, because a lot of times people might react differently to if there's a storied past, let's say, in someone's up. And let's face it, I don't care whether you're Greek, Chinese, Irish, Italian, Jewish. There's the good and the bad, right? There's never there's no perfect ethnicity. But one of the things that I've enjoyed is the diversity of the people that I've grown up with and have spent time with. And really, truly, at the end of the day, I hope deep down inside people do appreciate and respect their own culture, both the good and the bad, understanding it, but also being able to see how it differentiates, but also how it compares to other cultures. And so, I consider myself obviously a proud Greek American, but I definitely enjoy, the experiences that I've had in my life. And obviously you've seen, you're a Chinese American. I'm hoping you're, very proud of your heritage and your background and your parents and your family and so forth, and the legacy that they brought over. Obviously we've seen a lot of interest in Greece from China, from Chinese companies. The governments are on a very close basis. There's been a lot of investment. From your perspective, I mean, did that factor in at all? I mean, I know, there's presence everywhere. I get it, but has that factored in at all in any of your decisions, both either coming to Greece or working in Greece? And do you actually, do you see from your own set of eyes, being there and living there, do you see that presence there?
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely see the presence kind of growing, although I think growing up in a Chinese household within a Chinese community, I think Chinese culture is kind of famous for also kind of keeping to itself a little bit, very quiet, a little bit under the radar. So you kind of have to search a little bit in Athens to find the pockets, but through friends that either are Greeks from the diaspora that have spent time in China and have been back here, or actually just, making first Chinese immigrants from China friends. You do see that presence. And I have seen it grow over time during my time here. And then I would say, I think something calling back to the kind of the proud and the just taking pride in the legacy nature. An anecdote I like to share it often is when I first decided to move to Greece and I told my parents about it. One of the first things outside of the initial shock, because they were like, making decision, what's in Greece, was my dad turned to me and said, "This is incredible, Lucy. You will get to experience a culture that is not only longer than, 200, 300 years old like America is, but truly thousands of millennia of years of existence, like the Chinese culture. And
Right.
so that was kind of like a big, for me, like validation from my parents, and just a big head nod that like there is something familiar that I'm going into, even if I don't speak the language, I don't have, the DNA. And I have seen that really, on a personal level, I think I first started actively saying I'm Chinese American instead of just like, oh, I'm American, like I'm from Detroit. Greece taught me that, truthfully, because when they asked me where I was from my first year, I didn't really understand, because I was taking it from an American perspective, and then I'm like, yeah, but I grew up in the Midwest. I don't understand what the is that that's not the correct, right. And it is the correct answer. It's just my Greek friends pulled me aside once, and they were like, Lucy, when you're being asked that here, they're not asking you because of any reason other than they want to know what your origins are, because they see that, you have some East Asian origins, and they are very proud of their legacy and kind of their roots. And they are just curious to learn about your legacy and your roots. And I think that was really powerful and impactful for me. And that has not only kind of motivated me in different ways on the business side, but it's also just motivated me to stay here for the long run as well, because there's a lot of familiarity, both on just the personal level, and also seeing kind of these ties, Sino-Hellenic ties, really continue blossoming through various initiatives. It really is. It's kind of a nice way for me to find my way back to my Patrita as well. So.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's cool. That's again, you made a big decision and a big investment in yourself, and it's great that you're really enjoying it and experiencing it. And the fact that you physically moved over there obviously was a significant sacrifice. But as you said, one that you had to make in order to do what you're doing now. And outside of business, I'm just curious, how have you? You traveled to Greece before, so you saw how as a tourist. But in terms of the life living in Greece, outside of business and networking and so forth, how have you entrenched yourself there? What types of things have you enjoyed that have have you been involved in anything outside of I'm not saying personal activity, but any organizations or groups there that have resonated with you that you've spent some time doing, either volunteering or helping with? So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. In terms of volunteering, I am straying not too far from our actual startup work, but I'm a mentor at the Athens Center for Innovation at one of the Athens universities, AWEB here. I also, in my first couple of years, was volunteering at a kind of refugee tech type of organization. And then for fun, that was brought about by work. Pre-COVID, I was working out of a co-working space called Stone Soup, and I'm still a pretty active member of their community. And they just have a lot of now nice online events, but also back then they were doing rooftop yoga, things like that. So really nice community building. And yes, I live in the center. So on a more personal note, I like to take walks up to Likavitos, especially now with kind of Greece's lockdown, just exploring all of the increased kind of greenery and green spaces that have been popping up over the last year or so.
And let's talk about it, reflecting now on that decision. Challenges, obstacles, highlights. Validate. It sounds like everything's working to your benefit. So it sounded like it was a great decision. But tell us a little bit about looking back now. Would you have done anything different? What were some of the problems or issues that you may have encountered, other than the cultural difference, let's say, or the transition from U.S. to Greece?
Wow, that's a really good question. I would say,
if you had to start over, what would you do differently, or it's pretty much falling along the path you expected it to?
It's I'm also a firm believer, and I don't think I truly would have done anything differently. If anything, maybe I would have, oh, that's something I didn't mention before. Maybe I would have taken Greek like 6 months earlier. I took it about like a year into my move here. But yeah, I think I've just enjoyed, even through the challenges of kind of adapting, learning the language, which is so difficult, but so beautiful. And kind of brushing up against the business cultural and cultural differences. I think what has been nice is it really, even especially in the challenging moments, it makes you as an expat, as a person that's in a new environment, really step back and evaluate like what of it is from your past habits or the world that you're accustomed to, and what of it is just like normal for and like adapting to a difficult situation, etc. But I guess, yeah, that's a long-winded way of saying I wouldn't have done, if I'd done anything differently, maybe it's post more, and like one of my close friends here is I met through one of the like Athens and Expats Facebook groups. She's from Athens. She was born and raised in Athens. So maybe like be a little bit more proactive in the beginning, posting a little bit more to get more, friends. But I'm very happy with how organically things have kind of shaken out. So.
That's great. And how do you, before we wrap things up, what's your assessment and viewpoint of the Greek economy and some of the things that you feel are definitely moving in the right direction? Obviously, the government really seems to be opening up, very pro-business, but like anything else, it takes time. It takes time to obviously change an embedded culture in doing business a certain way. Opening up universities to tech transfer and what they've been doing pretty much behind the scenes, so to speak, over the years. And so, but just in general, I mean, how do you see that evolution of the Greek economy, the ecosystem that you're involved with, and what do you think are some of the, I guess, more important next steps, big picture, for them to continue to evolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say in terms of the assessment of the progress and kind of the future growth, my outlook is very positive, very bullish on the Greek economy. Even in the last 4 years, I've seen a lot of improvement in the ecosystem. I've seen business be a little bit friendlier. There's tax breaks being issued across the board, whether you are a startup, a founder is trying to create a startup, or an investor trying to invest in startups, largely driven by the new administration. I would also say we're seeing lots of votes of confidence from international investors. So definitely, like we had mentioned before, East Asian investors, Chinese interest, Middle Eastern interest. Just, I think Greece geographically, historically, has been very well positioned in culture and location to do business with all of these regions really seamlessly. And now you're seeing kind of the next wave of that. And also American interests. We have votes of confidence from Tesla, Microsoft, people that are really big names, tech giants that are committing capital and to planting research roots or back-end office roots to Greece, which I think is really validating for the skill set and just the level of talent that is still pretty untapped here because of post-crisis environments. And then what was the second half of that question?
Just in terms of what else do you see that maybe they possibly could consider doing to help further develop the ecosystem? Things that you probably have remember back here, or things that are happening in this country, which are obviously much more mature marketplace, but things maybe in the short run, do you think that could benefit them?
Yes, definitely. One thing that's been started that the entire ecosystem and kind of people locally and globally is an initiative called Greek Tech, also Greek Tech, a private organization, but a government started organization called Elevate Greece that is currently a database mapping all of the Greek startups in Greece. but also I think has plans to basically, and is offering benefits such as kind of resources for what tax breaks are available for founders in Greece, what other, just like the ins and outs of actually helping founders start businesses in Greece. And so I think that will be a very, very important project to watch develop, and for them to keep adding kind of more robust features and more robust resources to, because it's a huge vote of confidence and from the top down, from the government level down, to drive innovation. And then I think the second prong of what would be helpful and what we're already seeing happen are, successful Greeks in the diaspora, with the curiosity to make their way back to the Patrida to do it. I think we're having more conversations with, exited Greek entrepreneurs or individuals like yourself, people that are just like really curious to learn more about Greek tech, about what's happening, and how to contribute, how to maybe younger Greeks that want to move back and work at organizations. I had a couple of those conversations already, like today, looking for job ops with local startups. And that is truly awesome, because that brings the global perspective, coupled with the Greek roots and DNA, that I think will be really powerful for unlocking the next level of ecosystem growth.
And your personal goals. I mean, you're starting a fund, so you're not going away. But what do you foresee your plans for the future? I mean, you're entrenched in Greece right now.
Yeah.
Maybe it will be a lifetime, maybe not. But certainly, you've had a great experience in the several years you've been there. But how do you see your kind of career and life projecting out?
Yeah, definitely. I purchased my flat, so I see myself, having Greece as a home base, the home base now and a home base in the future. I also see myself making more trips to China, not just for family reasons, but more and more for business reasons. That has been a big draw. We are starting to have more conversations there. And there's also a Greek community that's in China, which is awesome. So kind of building now, going from the US to Greece, and now seeing this next leg of the climb be more Greece to China, and kind of creating, bridging the worlds that I come from and I live across. That's
wonderful. And it's great as we close, as I said earlier, to see even to this day, obviously a much different country than it was, never mind during the revolution 200 years ago, but as you mentioned, one of the oldest cultures in existence, that Phil Hellenes, like yourself, made a decision to bring their experiences, their expertise, and their foresight to Greece to help. And you're certainly have been a very important player in the growth of the startup ecosystem. And if it wasn't people like yourself, Lucy, coming over there, then they'd be obviously a step or two behind. But the fact that there are people like yourself that had no connection at all to Greece, made a decision to pack up your bags, move there, and contribute to society, contribute to their well-being. And so we thank you. You're truly a Greek at heart, and we're very happy and honored to see that folks like yourself are doing things like this. And it takes, again, I know there's thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of Phil Hellenes out there, and we as Greeks and Greek Americans truly appreciate what you've done to continue to not only preserve our great culture, but to perpetuate it in much different ways as we continue to move to the 21st century. So thank you for your time this morning. Really appreciated it, Lucy.
Go, Feristo. I thank you, Drake. Thank you so much for the kind words. And if I might close with just a small anecdote, I think just honestly, so kind, but I think I'm learning so much more and just receiving so much from the Greek culture, that if I can even give back like a fraction of that, I feel very fortunate. And one thing that I like to do is walk around the Acropolis or like Plaka area, and it's really powerful knowing that there's just been thousands of years of like people have walked these roads before. And what's 1 year, 10 years of hardship? And so I think if anything is going to keep me here, it's that feeling where you stand on the ground where like legacy has been built. So thank you, Greece, and to the Hellenes and Phil Hellenes that have accepted me into this community.
You're very welcome. And thank you. And thanks for joining us today.